Okay, so we continue our discussion of Brachos Daf Zayin, and we just come off the tail end of the famous question described by the Gemara that Moses asks Hashem. And the question is, why is it that we see that one righteous person prospers and another righteous person suffers? One wicked person prospers and another wicked person suffers. And as we described, the answer that the Gemara describes Hashem as giving is that there, in the precision of your question, is the answer. That there are different grades of righteous people and different grades of wicked people. And it might be that due to the individual circumstances of this righteous person or wicked person, either in the first answer because of the culture in which he was raised, their lineage, their parents, or the other because there is some level of perfection that they have yet to attain, even though they can still be considered righteous, or they have not. They can be considered wicked, but they haven't fully become wicked. So that's the question the Gemara, the answer that the Gemara presents up till now. But then the Gemara ends off by saying, Upliga de Rabbi Meir, this statement attributed to Rabbi Yossi is disputing Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir, on the other hand, said that this question Hashem never answered Moshe. God wouldn't tell Moses why some righteous people suffer and some wicked people prosper. And I want to share with you a couple of some impressions that I have in reading some of the commentaries on the Gemara, how we might understand what Rabbi Meir's issue is with this answer presented by Rabbi Yossi. He says, Rabbi Meir says, God only answered him on two of the questions, the first two questions, but this question God wouldn't answer him. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, V'chanosiyas asher achon, I will be gracious unto whom I'll be gracious. Afal pi she'eino hagun, even though he is not deserving, or even though he's not fitting. V'richamtiyas asher arachem, and I will have mercy upon whom I will have mercy. Afal pi she'eino hagun, even though he's not fitting, even though they're not worthy. So the first one I mentioned already is that there's an issue with the question itself, which is the premise of the question is why there one righteous person who suffers and another righteous person who prospers is a person standing from the outside, looking at other people, judging them to be righteous or wicked, and then having a question on God of why this person gets more than I think they deserve or less than I deserve. And the answer to that simply is, you can't judge. Your premise is a judgment of a person, and that then leads you to question God. If you approach the world with humility and you understand that you don't know who is righteous and who is wicked, you don't have insight into that. You can't properly know fully whether a person is righteous or wicked, and therefore this is not a question worth answering. There's another approach. Now, you might say, the person looks to me to be righteous. Well, you don't know what a person is, what a person isn't. You also don't know, we know that that the tzaddikim are judged kechut asara. When a person reaches a very advanced level, then their actions become even more critical, and they become judged to a higher standard. And so the algorithm that God uses to determine who should get what is not something that a person should be entering into. So again, there's two answers embedded in this approach. One is, you don't have access to God's algorithm for determining what a person's reward or punishment should be. The other is, you don't have access to a person's inner life to assess whether they're truly righteous or wicked. And then take that to another level is, perhaps you shouldn't even be inhabiting that headspace in which you are walking around trying to look at other people and to determine what's their level of tzidkus, their level of righteousness. You want to ask a person a halacha shayla. We're not talking about whether a person is a scholar. Scholarship and righteousness is two different things. Scholarship is objectively measurable. Whether you should ask a person a shayla, whether you should ask a person a halachic ruling, that's something that you have to be able to assess a person's scholarship. But to assess their inner life, to assess their relationship with God, you have no insight to that whatsoever. This is one impression. Another is also that there is, when we talk about a person not being fitting, a lot of the commentaries struggle with this to say, does this mean that there's no reward and punishment? And to that again, I'm not saying that that there is no righteousness, there's no justice in God's world. Only that it isn't for us. We don't have the wherewithal to be able to assess, to determine God's what is just and what is righteous. We don't understand what that is. But there's a whole other approach, which is to say, understand v'chanosias asher achon. God's fundamental approach to the world, the approach of a creator to his creation, is fundamentally one of chen and rachmanus, of grace and mercy. That is, a creator's act of creation can't be transactional. It has to be fundamentally one of grace and of selfless giving. It's an unmeasured and untransactional gift that is the act of creation. And therefore, a person is born from the instant they're born, before having done any good deeds. And they already exist as a self that has identified itself as separate from Hashem. And yet, Hashem continues to give them life and give them blessing and give them every breath they get is an act of grace and mercy from Hashem, which is in no way tied to any measurement of how good that person is or how bad that person is, how much they're going to give back to God. God creates without a transaction, and B, no matter what we give to God, it isn't a transaction. So to Rabbi Meir introduces this idea, this understanding of humility and appreciation that then helps us to step away from this judgmental attitude, this questioning attitude, and instead to appreciate that everything we have is a gift from Hashem, and to let go of that question. And I think it's also important to recognize, we see this in Reb Meir's life as well, that he had this non-judgmental attitude. Reb Meir is famously the student of Acher, Elisha ben Avuya, who is known to be a renegade Torah scholar, formerly a Torah scholar, turned renegade and rebel against Torah. And Rabbi Meir still treats him with respect and continues to learn from him and to treat him with dignity. And this is, I think, gives us to understand Rabbi Meir's approach, that he isn't necessarily saying that the fact that this person is a renegade or a rebel doesn't matter, but simply that it doesn't matter to him. It matters to Hashem, and Hashem has His ways of dealing with it, but it's not my issue, and therefore, al zeh, on this Hashem wouldn't answer Moshe Rabbeinu.